Just trying to go on a diet. Will that work? Be honest with yourself. 95% of the time, it won't. Today we're going to get philosophical for a little bit. And hear me out. I lived in Asia for around 10 years. From 2010 to 2020, I lived in Thailand. And one thing that really changed how I see life itself is what they called the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths is something they get taught from a very young age. It comes from the Buddhist canon, but this is nothing to do with religion. It's just a way to start looking at life. And what the Four Noble Truths are, just a quick overview before we dive into them. The first noble truth is life is suffering. What a way to start, hey? The second noble truth, identify the suffering. The third noble truth. Think 8 to 10 years ago, there was a movie with the snowman, with Elsa, with Anna. There was a song that got stuck in everyone's heads. If you guessed it. Let it go, let it go. That's where the third noble truth is. Let go of the suffering. We're going to come back to number 2 and 3. And then there's the fourth noble truth. The one thing we all want at all cost. We want this at all times. Starts with the letter P. Any guesses? Peace. So let's unpack that. The first noble truth is life is suffering. We are going to have suffering in life. Or more specifically, the translation, life is unsatisfactoriness. Unsatisfactoriness and suffering a lot of times go hand in hand here. Things are going to happen. We are going to have suffering. That's where the second noble truth comes into play. Identify the suffering. There's only two kinds of suffering in this world. Internal suffering and external suffering. External suffering is suffering that happens to us. Things that make us suffer that's out of our control. Such as, you get diagnosed with an illness. Can you control that? No. Somebody passes away in your family. You go for a morning run, you trip, you break your leg. Going to a meeting, suddenly somebody drives into the back of your car. All these things create suffering in us. Physical or mental, but they are out of your control. That's what I mean with the first noble truth. Life is suffering. Things are going to happen. But that second kind of suffering, the internal suffering, that is you with all the couldas, the shouldas, the wouldas. If I only did this, if I only said this, maybe if I only did this, this wouldn't have happened. If I said this, I would have done this. How often do you do that? We are experts in the coulda, shouldas, and wouldas. To the point, I think we all can earn a PhD in doing coulda, shoulda, wouldas. Now that is 90% of all our suffering. That's us being our own judge, jury, and executioner. That's where the internal suffering needs to be addressed. And that's the third noble truth, letting go of the suffering. What kind of suffering? The internal suffering. Unless we start working with the internal suffering, we will never have the fourth noble truth, which is peace. But also, keep in mind, peace and suffering is the same coin. They're just two different sides of the coin. We can't have peace without suffering and suffering without peace. They are the same coin. You can still be suffering, but you can be at peace. We are chasing peace at all times in our Western upbringing and don't want any suffering. And then when something happens and we suffer a bit, we lose all sense of peace and everything just falls down. No, it's called dualism. You can't have the one without the other. How do we know what is day without night, winter without summer? How do you know what is good if we don't know what is evil? Same with peace and suffering. We have both and we can still be suffering and be at peace. So that internal suffering is a lot of times what we start working towards, and let's use another word there, our mental health, our distress tolerance, our stress management, setting up boundaries, starting to be more assertive, taking care of myself, putting myself first, to cultivate my resilience, to become a stronger person, to be there for my loved ones, to not be walked over, and to tackle the problems head on. That's what we mean with that internal suffering. Unless we do the work, we are going to be a slave to that coulda, the shouldas, the wouldas. And if you think those couldas, the shouldas, the wouldas, how much of that ruminating in your head leads us to a lot of unhealthy coping mechanisms, overeating, emotional eating, then body issues, alcohol, gambling, social media, all these kinds of stuff, Netflix, YouTube, where we would rather look for a form of escape than address the problem. And then we don't address the problem gets bigger, we feel more anxious, we feel more guilty, And then we just repeat that cycle, going back to the coping mechanism we have chosen. Even if it's food, alcohol, drugs, substance abuse, YouTube, social media, online gaming, the list goes on. All of us are chasing some form of escape if we don't start addressing the internal factors that leads to that mental suffering. And to think a bit deeper here, let's address the 3 planes of existence. There's the past, the present, and the future. Where do you spend most of your time? Be honest. The past, most likely. Yes, physically, we are in the present. Mentally, we spend so much time in the past, and then we jump to the future, and then we jump back to the past, future, past, future. What are we forgetting about? The present. Now, I'm not saying forget about the past, but if you look here, what's this thing? It's a cup. If I tell you to turn this cup into a hamburger, will you do it? No, we can't. You won't even mentally try to process how to do it. Why do we do that with our past? Our past is set in stone. We can't change anything about it. So I'm not saying forget it, but this mental state of living in the past, jumping to the future, living in the past, jumping to the future, what happens in the present? You're just repeating your habits, all your coping mechanisms, all your forms of escape. Then our past becomes our future because our habits keep repeating in the present because we are on autopilot. We aren't actively living in the present to change the problem. So yes, then your past will keep repeating and just become your future. And that can be the diabetes, the hypertension, the divorces, the alcohol abuse, the overeating, the emotional. Yes, because those are the mechanisms we've chosen as our form of escape. And they are going to keep repeating and repeating unless we start living in the present, changing the habits that got us to this point. And that's hard work. It's not a diet that fixes that. It's not a new exercise program that fixes it. Those things help, but they don't fix the problem. We need to start looking. What are we avoiding? Why aren't we putting effort into our own mental health, our own resilience? Because unless we start addressing those things, just trying to go on a diet, will that work? Be honest with yourself. 95% of the time, it won't. So think about those 4 noble truths. Unpack it a bit. Deep dive into it. Ask yourself that internal suffering, where is that coming from? This is where we don't forget about the past. The past is there to teach you how to live in the present, because how you live in the present guarantees you the future you will have. But most of us don't live in the present. We live in the past, then we jump to the future, and we are doing everything in the present on autopilot. All those forms of escape, coping mechanisms, and all these biases are just there rinsing and repeating, and nothing changes. Start thinking, what do we need to change? I'm going to give you a little exercise here. Take a piece of paper. Think back on this year. We're nearly at the end of the year. What 5 things really kept creating stress in your life? Is it financial? Is it at home? Is it your partner? Is it business? Is it work? 5 things that you feel that keeps getting you under. Even if it's just 3. Once you have those 3 things, start writing down why. What's the emotions? What is causing it? Where did it come from? See where that pen leads you. And then once that's done, start thinking, once you've written all those emotions out, all the ideas, everything that's attached to those negative things. Okay, what are 2 to 3 things we can start practicing just to be a little bit better? If you need help with these, don't be shy to reach out. But start thinking about those 4 noble truths and the 3 planes of existence. If you're feeling worried, stressed, anxious, is it internal or external? Is there something you can do about it? Because unless you start doing something about it, those feelings will not go away and you will start chasing forms of escape. It's not going to change in a week or 2. It's identifying those 3 to 5 things. Then, what steps can we start taking to address them? Put it on a piece of paper. Write these things down. If it just stays inside here in the head, nothing's going to happen. You need to start writing it down. Because if we put it on pen and paper, it becomes tangible. And if it becomes tangible, we can process it more logically and not just in our emotional part of the brain. I'm going to ask you a favor. If you enjoyed this video and you found value in it, please give me a thumbs up or a subscribe. Then I know I gave you something to think about today to start living a better version of yourself. And as I always say, remember, be better today than you were yesterday.